Welcome to the Alpha Man podcast, hosted by Stephen Goldstein and Mark Randall. The podcast which is always looking to help traders, whether they're new to the game or whether they are seasoned and experienced traders, explore how they can be better, more productive, more effective traders by looking at the human aspects of trading performance. The Alpha Man podcast is sponsored by the Society of Technical Analysts, the STA, the world's leading body for the advancement of technical analysis, education and research. You can find out more about them on their website, technicalanalysts.com. We are particularly keen to promote their home study course, one of the world's leading ways to learn more about the in-depth aspects of technical analysis, different approaches, different methods, different styles, and this has been put together by some of the world's leading technical analysts and is based off the diploma program which the STA has been delivering for many years at some of the world's leading educational institutions. Alpha Mind listeners can find out how to get a discount on this brilliant home study course by going to alpha-mind.net and scrolling down to the section about the home study course. Now, on with this week's podcast.
Well, welcome to this week's Alpha Mind podcast, and we are absolutely delighted to have Simon Mundie back with us. Some of you may recall him, but we have new listeners turning up all the time on this podcast. And Simon, a broadcaster, worked very much with the BBC through some significant sporting events, and has interviewed some of the people that would make most of you fall for chair if you saw the people that he's engaged with. But he's got a new book out called Champion Thinking, and some of today's discussion will centre around what the lessons that came from that experience of writing that book and what he picks up. He's also host of the Life Lessons podcast, which has had various forms over the years, and as Simon chuckling away. But if you just see the list of the people that he's engaged with, it's pretty much every sporting icon of the modern age that you could imagine. He has engaged with a real, sort of deep level of thought-provoking conversation, and lots of things emerged from that. And I'm sure pretty much the book contains some of that. But, welcome, Simon. I think first, perhaps it's an opportunity for you to give us a bit more than just my little, second-rate intro there. There's more about your story that I'm sure I've left off.
Well, hi, gentlemen. Steve, Mark, always a pleasure to see you both. I don't know what to add to that. That was a tour de force, Mark. I think you've covered most of it. The broadcasting, the podcast, as you say, a few iterations. The book that was published earlier this year, Champion Thinking, How to Find Success Without Losing Yourself, trying to flip what I call success evangelism on its head a bit. Speaker, do a lot of speaking, increasingly so. So reach out if you fancy a bit of that. That's it in the main for now. I think that covers all the key bits. So thanks, Mark. It was a lovely intro.
Lovely. Well, let's get into it then. So I guess want you to get back your head into the book itself. And of course, you would have called upon multiple experiences of these engagements with the very best of the best. Was there anything that became a common denominator that was showing up when you were trying to pull things together? Was there a common trait they had? Was there a common habit? Was it a process? Was it just an attitude? What was showing up from as you were pulling this work together?
Well, I had a very clear idea of the big idea and a theme that has shown up for me time and time again in interviewing, as you say, some of the world's most elite sporting performers. And that has two aspects to it, really. Now, one is around success itself. And, we love watching sport. We love playing sport. And I think there's a common idea that it's all about winning and the trophies and success. And this obviously is not just exclusive to sport by any means. I think this whole idea of I'll be happy when X happens is one of life's great traps in many ways, whether it be the job, the promotion, the relationship, etc. But in sport, that is heightened, because obviously what people are aiming for is, in some cases, otherworldly, if you think of it in terms of trying to win a World Cup or win an Olympic gold medal. And the sacrifice and the striving and the dedication required to achieve those things is obviously remarkable. But what I would say is that over the years of interviewing these people and the years prior to that of covering the big events and following sport very closely, over a decade, I did notice this theme around, or this recurrent commonplace result, which was that a lot of people would achieve their seeming heart's desire of winning the biggest things, only to be left with a sense and a feeling of, is that it? I expected to feel more than this. Even emptiness and disappointment on not infrequent. In the book I think Johnny Wilkinson's a really good example of this. And I think he is particularly a strong example of this because of the fact that when he was a boy, 7, 8 years old, he set 2 goals, which was to be the best rugby player in the world and to win the Rugby World Cup. And that is anyway, I'll come back to that. But when he was 24, he achieved both of those things, as we know, obviously famously kicked the winning drop goal to give England the Rugby World Cup for the first and only time in their history. And so it follows that, or it would seem to follow that, according to the way most people live their lives, that when he ticked off the biggest goals that he could possibly conceive of, he would feel a deep sense of fulfillment and satisfaction that would last. And that was definitely not the case. It's quite well covered that the day after he kicked that winning drop goal, he said he felt as empty as he'd ever felt. And so that's pretty revealing. And he's far from being alone in that. I think of Rebecca Romero, who's won Olympic gold, spoke about, Olympic gold medals should come with a health warning. There are so many examples of people who have reached the top in sport, but also in life, in business or celebrity, whatever, acting, and being left with this void, oh my goodness, this isn't fulfilling me, satisfying me in the way that I expected, in some way that it was promised. So therefore, my conclusion from that is that we can definitively say that success is not synonymous with happiness. But the other side to this is, and so just to add a little caveat there, or not caveat, but a little add-on, you often hear this in sport. It's all about the trophies. It's all about the winning. It's a bit of a cliche knocked out, for example, on the Match of the Day sofa over the years. It's about trophies. You've got to move clubs, trophies. Well, the example I've given and many others suggest it's not. And I can go further than that, because whilst success in and of itself is not synonymous with happiness, fulfillment, all those things that we really want, flow is. And I think I've perhaps touched on this before with you both to some degree, but flow is. And you can't be in flow and it not be inherently enjoyable. Like, by definition, it is when we feel and perform at our best. And there's a couple of really interesting characteristics of flow. One is that, our sense of time distorts. We are all familiar with this, a conversation that is an hour long can feel like it zips by in 10 minutes when you're really engaged and engrossed and present. But on the other hand, anyone who's got kids knows that when they're sat in the back seat in a car journey, they're going, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? And time can drag to the nth degree when you're resistant to it. But in flow, that time can distort in pretty funky ways. And when you're so engaged with what you're doing, thoughts about past drop away, thoughts about future drop away, past drop away, so does our identity. So another key aspect of flow is not only a distortion of time, but losing our sense of self. And And, we love it when that happens. And I think that is extremely revealing. And, sport is a metaphor for life. And the implications of that, it's very easy to focus just on the flow, but the implications of actually we love it when we lose our sense of self, this sense of past and future, of becoming in the future. I'm going to become okay or enough or happy or content, whatever, in the future. And I'm defined by my past in terms of identity, but you're so lost in the moment that it's almost like you and the experience become one. And, we love it when that happens. And then that flies again in the face of what I sometimes call success evangelism, because, if it's about winning and success and trophies and all that kind of thing, that's also a little bit linked with becoming a somebody. But actually, when you're in flow, you're kind of experiencing being a nobody in one respect. And we love it when that happens. So I would say that this kind of key big idea of the book is that we've actually kind of got it the wrong way around. We spend all our lives trying to aggrandize this self-concept we have, the voice in our head that's always focused on I, me, and my. And actually, the real joy and satisfaction is found when that disappears, as it does during the process of flow, or when we lose ourselves in any activity, whatever it may be, sport just being one.
Simon, thank you again for coming on the podcast. And that was a brilliant introductory element, which it's there's so many things that I'd like to say to, and sort of add to that. But I think just to sort of make sure that we link this to trading, at least for our listeners, the reason we like to have sports people on and people talking about success in sport is that trading and sport are really so interrelated. They're both performance activities.
Mm-hmm.
And there is so much to be learned from people in the fields of performance of sport, which has been a lot more written about than it has in the trading world from them. So again, thank you for coming back on. Then I'm going to go back to what you were saying now. And there's a few things. Success evangelism, what a brilliant term. Okay.
Thank you.
Whether you invented that or not, I think you should definitely patent it.
Great idea.
And that brings me back to this idea of, there's a few things I want to throw out to you. So success evangelism, again, if you could describe what that is a little bit more for our audience, and I think you've talked about it, but just give it a bit more definition. And then losing our sense of self. I love that phrase. It's such a wonderful phrase. So perhaps if you could just maybe broaden those two out, what you mean by those.
Sure.
Thank you.
Well, I'm going to start actually. I posted, and this wasn't mine, but someone posted something on Substack actually, where I write my newsletter, and I reposted it because it resonated so much. And I'll read to you what it says. It's a woman called Olivia Alners. Said, "I don't want to wake up at 5 a.m. I don't want to optimize every moment for productivity. I don't want to do it all or have it all. I want to be happy. I want to be at peace. I want to be content. I want to live at a pace I can sustain and be healthy at. And I'm okay if that means my life looks less impressive." And I saw that and I thought that's a lovely sentiment, and it resonated with a huge amount of people. And so I think, being in the podcast space and to some degree in the self-improvement space, although I'm not really a fan of that, although, each to their own. And there's some value in it, certainly. But I think there's there's a very common idea of, being your best self, becoming your best self. Every day I'm going to get a bit better. Just always focusing on becoming, on looking to the future, on, normal is not good enough. If I'm not standing out as special, then I'm in some way, failing and inadequate. And I think a lot of high performance related stuff has hidden within it this this seed of inadequacy of, we have to justify our existence. And we do that by standing out, by striving to the nth degree to achieve X, Y, and Z. And I think that can be quite corrosive on a number of levels. On a personal level, if you're always fixated on becoming in the future, that means by definition, you're not okay being now. And then also, I think this feeds into things like overconsumption, into not knowing when we have enough, not knowing when we've done enough, and all those kind of things. And I think if you think of it in terms of the planet and, one of the, obviously, the great issues of our time in terms of, for example, climate change and so on and so forth, and that stemming from, growth at all costs and having more and so on and so forth. Well, I think that a lot of that stems actually in this sense of not being enough right now. And I think I would suggest that, that is a very deep rooted and common belief and misconception that people have. And I can give you a quick example. So since we last spoke, we've welcomed another addition to the family. So we've got an 11-month-old baby, and thanks, Steve, for the little quiet clap there. She is very entertaining and also a handful. But when I look at my youngest daughter, there's no question that she's not enough. It's an absurd question. And also from her point of view, it's obvious that that's not, she doesn't suffer with low self-esteem or any of that stuff, right? And there's nothing that she needs to do from her point of view or my point of view to be enough. It's literally an absurdity. And yet, obviously, that will become part of her reality, as her ego and her identity and her mind and the conditioning and all that stuff comes online. And that's true of all of us. But I think that underneath all of that actually what is true of my daughter is true of all of us. We've just lost touch with it. This we are intrinsically enough. And I think reconnecting with that kind of flies in the face of this success evangelism of becoming. It's about recognizing your well-being, and then of course there's nothing wrong with wanting to express that in whatever you do. For a lot of people that might be an Olympic gold medal or XYZ. So I don't mean to do down people who achieve great things by any stretch, but I think the intention and the motivation is where it's at. And I think if you're looking to fill a void through success, which I think a lot of people are, then to me that's corrosive and doomed to failure. And so that's what I think success evangelism for me means. And I think is very, very pervasive, particularly in a lot of self-improvement and a lot of these kind of, get up at 5 a.m. type optimizing, outlooks and strategies. So that I hope answers your first question, Steve, in terms of success evangelism. In terms of losing yourself. So, this is a very interesting question because it begs the question like, well, what is myself? And if you ask most people, they, tell me about yourself. They will talk to you about the roles they do, the beliefs they have, the tribal affiliations, whether it, be religious or national or whatever it may be, or football team, a lot of football, that always makes me laugh. Football teams, people who, I'll tell you a quick story to illustrate this, what I mean by this. I was once listening to a phone in on a rival big radio station, and it was after Chelsea had won the Premier League, and this guy rang in and he was a Chelsea fan, and the radio host began by welcoming this guy. We'll call him Bob. Bob, welcome to the show. Firstly, Bob, I'd like to congratulate you on winning the Premier League. And this guy, Bob, said, thanks very much. Deadly serious, as if he had done anything of real note towards them winning the Premier League. But he was so identified with his support of the team that he felt like he was in a position to take some credit for the success, which, I don't think that's uncommon, but that's like me taking credit for Roger Federer's victories just because I'm a fan of his. And so to come back to my point now, I think, we identify with so much of the content of our experience. And as I said, like right now, my daughter, there's no identity there. She's just utterly present. She just is. It's just a being there. But then as we grow, we tend to form this mental, thought-based identity about who we are based on, our history, our story, all the things like that, what's happened to us, our beliefs, our view of ourselves, which will obviously be conditioned by our experiences, the time we live in, all these things. And it's basically this thought-based identity. And if you think about the number of thoughts rattling around your head, and people talk about, 60,000 or whatever, you can get different estimates from different people. The majority of people's thoughts have an element of I, me, and my in them. Like we all see through the world through the prism of how does this impact me? What are the implications to me? What do people think of me? All that kind of stuff. And also, our identity changes according to who we're speaking to. I know that kind of like the idea that pops in my head about myself will be different speaking to you than it would an old teacher of mine, or certain friends, or perhaps something. It's just this. We think there is this fixed self, somewhere in our head, and we define it through thoughts and all that stuff. But as I probably said, I hope I said during our first conversation, and Mark, with his meditation and mindfulness background, will be obviously very aware of this, is that we are not our thoughts, we are aware of our thoughts. So by definition, we can't be defined by the thoughts that we have about ourselves. They're just labels. They're like subtitles on a movie. We think we are the subtitles, not the movie, as it were. And so that's what I mean about losing yourself, is that when you're so to what is, then, and you're not thinking about the past and you're not thinking about the future, and those I, me, my thoughts go, then that sense of enoughness that, for example, is so obvious in my daughter right now, that is it sort of shines. And so I would say that is the source of peace and joy and contentment and all those things. But what can sort of trigger it varies from person to person. Yeah, for one person it could be, following Chelsea. For another person it could be playing the piano. For another person it could be investing. Right? I remember you, Steve, saying, when we last spoke about how you got so lost in trading. You really lost yourself in it. There was a passion there, and so the portals into it are obviously very different. But actually, what I'm arguing really is that it's not the investing or the tennis or the piano itself. It's revealing something that's already there in us, but it's obscured by this thought-based self that we create by identifying with our thoughts way too much. I hope that answered your question in some way.
We'll return to this excellent podcast in a moment. Just want to first tell you about my new book, Mastering the Mental Game of Trading. And to do this, rather than use my own words, I'm going to share part of a review that came from a senior executive at a major investment bank. Drawing on Stephen's extensive experience as a performance coach, the former trader presents powerful models and theories that challenge readers to reflect upon their own mental, emotional and behavioural challenges when engaged in trading. Stephen introduces the performance process cycle, a unique framework that serves as a guiding roadmap through a trader's journey, illuminating the complex interplay between risk, uncertainty and human psyche. He also unveils the two approaches theory of trading, which transforms trading into two distinct practices, each with their own philosophical underpinnings. This focus makes the book a unique masterpiece for both the novice trader and the seasoned pro. It is a treasure trove of insights that I can only warm-heartedly recommend. If you are keen on learning more about mastering the mental game of trading, do go to Amazon or any major book retailer where the book is available in paperback, on Audible and on Kindle. Now back to the podcast.
I'm going to hand over to Mark in a minute because I know he's dying to ask you a question. But I wanted to just talk about two books that have been very important to me over the last 2 years, which in different ways come at this same topic. One is The Long Win by Kath Bishop.
Yeah, great book.
With that, absolutely
Yeah.
great book. And the other one, which you might not be familiar with, is A Caged Mind.
No.
Maria Iliffe Wood, who was my book coach.
Right.
My own inspirations as a performance coach and executive coach, one of my own teachers. And she wrote a wonderful book, and she was on the podcast a few months ago. And it's a short book, and it's told very much in a sort of personal style about her own emergence from her battles with herself and her, which everyone has. So it's a wonderful book. So I just wanted to, and if I've had a lot of people who have come back to us saying, well, that was a surprise on reading that, because it didn't seem relevant to this career, but actually it's very relevant to life itself as well.
100%. Yeah.
Whatever you're doing in your career.
Yeah.
So, but I'm going to hand over to Mr. Randall now. He's itching to get a question or a comment. Over to you, Mark.
No, fantastic. Well, I think, Simon, some of the point you made about the value of being a kid.
Yeah.
And actually, I think we've all got that in us, and that actually there are people that say just every now and then just be slightly sillier about something. I know somebody that she tried to have a career in clowning in the corporate world, and it didn't go far, but she comes up with these lovely things every now and then. She said to me the other day, every now and then, just jump in a puddle. Just do something that's just not what you kind of meant to do as a 60-year-old.
Yeah.
But actually doing something like climbing a tree is kind of like reminding you to be a kid, because, as you say, a kid has this freedom. And I'm sure that, they say that, we're distracted 50% of the time, we're in
minimum. Yeah.
It's so stupid, right? And we're 50% here and we're 50% in our head. That's if we're lucky. But most of the time we're skewed. But you wonder if a child, through their constant experience and curiosity, it has a relatively low sense of distraction in terms of thoughts, and is very much more present than that 50-50 equation.
Oh, gotcha.
And if we can get ourselves as adults into giving ourselves the opportunity of having those moments where we do something a bit different, that is something that something a child would do, with fooling around in a sensible way. But I like the idea of climbing a tree, in a safe way, of course. Because it's sort of what you did, and I think this concept of, if you can do that in your sort of vocational spare time and your free time, it kind of powers you to perform better when you've got the serious stuff to do.
100%.
Yeah, so I'd imagine that in the world of performance, whilst you've got those that are performing, the ones that have got sustainable performance have probably got some vocational things going on that most of us would be quite surprised about. And they get fulfilled through the vocational stuff. And I suppose in a way, that also becomes your parachute, as it were, when you have your Johnny Wilkinson moment where, well, what do you fall back to? Well, actually, if you've got a lot of vocational stuff going on, you would naturally fall back into some of that vocational activity, before you then engage with something that then gives you a challenge, if you want to. And I think your remark about actually normal is perfectly okay.
100%.
Normal is fine. And actually, we don't step back and appreciate what we have enough and enjoy where we are. If we did, actually, we'd probably make a better job of doing what we do now, because actually we're not having these thoughts about, I'm not good enough, and why has the neighbour got a brand new Lambo and I haven't? What am I doing wrong? All those types of thoughts. But I wanted to share that with you. There's this sense of being a kid or having vocational stuff, and you might have some examples from people that you've engaged with.
I think that's really interesting, everything you've just said. I think this idea of climbing a tree or jumping in a puddle, And I think, as we get older, the puddle's probably safer from a physical point of view, with backs and hips and knees and whatever else in my experience. But, I spoke earlier about identity and how we identify with so many things. And, being an adult is obviously is one of them. It's such, when you're an adult, you don't act like a kid, but as you say, we have this essence never goes anywhere. Part of us never, we have this intuition, don't we, that there's a part of us that never ages, like is you look in the mirror and you're like, crikey, on one level, this is clearly not true, but there's this sense that on another, we've always been the same. And so, of course, I think you're absolutely spot on. I think keeping that youthful exuberance alive is extremely valuable. I think in terms of what you said about the 50-50 split, in terms of being lost in thoughts of past and future and being present, well, and asking that question, how different is it for kids? Well, I can say, observing our 11-month-old baby, there's no thoughts of past and future. She's so present. There's no thoughts, probably, to some degree, but she's just utterly absorbed in the moment. She's always in flow, and so I would say that's our natural state. And then we become so identified with our mind and with thoughts in our head. And then in terms of the vocation, look, I think that's fundamental. In the first chapter of my book, I spoke about a guy who was one of my boyhood heroes, a rugby player called John Kerwin, now Sir John Kerwin, Knight of Services to Mental Health. And, he was an All Black rugby legend. And at the height of his career, when outwardly it looked like he was He-Man, I mean, quite literally looked like He-Man. He was blonde hair and, very muscular at a time when, they didn't all look that way as they do now. But inwardly, he was in a really bad place. Before the 1991 World Cup, he'd been suicidal just a couple of months before. And not that anyone would have known. And he came out about his mental health many years later and became sort of the face of it in New Zealand. And he's become Knight of Services to Mental Health. And, he's done some really interesting work in that area. But he talks about the importance of doing exactly what you spoke about, Mark, of, having a way to power down. And actually, he's got this lovely analogy. He says, when you're at work and, the computer's playing up and you ring IT and you go, oh, my computer's on the blink. Like, I've got to file a report in 10 minutes. Like, what do I do? Like, well, what's the first thing the IT people say to you every time? They say, switch it off and switch it on again. And 90% of the time that works. And the same is true of us. And so, he talks about it in terms of, for him, during COVID, he took up playing the guitar and he was like, it sounds like I'm strangling the cat. And I remember saying to him, oh, I'm sure it doesn't, trying to butter him up a bit. And he's like, it doesn't matter. That's not what it's about. It's about having something I enjoy that sort of takes me away from, being lost in what feels so important, which invariably is the work that we do. And I really, really connect with that. And so, if I think of people who played sport at the top level, there was one Welsh footballer when Wales reached the semi-final of the Euros. And I know that he was struggling a bit with anxiety. I don't think he was starting. He was on the subs bench, but he played Lego, and that enabled him to disengage. There's Helen Glover, who won back-to-back Olympic golds in rowing and was unbeaten for 4 years. I think 2012 was her first gold. And before the race, they were sat under the stands playing, I can't remember what game it was, but something like Boggle, some like board game, and it sort of engaged them, and they were totally, you know what it's like when we play these games or Monopoly or whatever, like or sport, right? I know when I play tennis and no one's watching, it feels really important, but it's not. You forget it 5 minutes later. But and the same thing can happen with a board game or card game. The mind can suck us in, and for those few moments while we're really engaged in that, well, then you're not thinking about as you say, the work and whatever else, and then when you come back to it, well, you've let off some steam, and also I noticed this when writing my book. I actually put this into practice. I would write for 3 hours in the morning. I was working at a nearby gym at the time. We hadn't built the garden office. My office was being turned into the baby's room. So I finished it off in this gym, and I was very aware of exactly what we're talking about. And so I'd work for 3 hours writing, and Steve, you'll know, it can be a torturous process at times. And then my mind would be like, oh, you haven't written enough words. So, you can't leave, you need to plow on. But I would ignore that, and I'd go for a swim, and then I'd have a steam, and then I'd come back to it, and I'd pick it back up. And by doing that, I'm taking my conscious mind off the work that I was trying to do. And whilst I was swimming and having a steam room and relaxing a little bit for 40 minutes, whatever it was, invariably my subconscious mind was working at it. So when I came back, it flowed so much easier. And so absolutely, I think if you can, if people aren't having something else that can take their mind off things, then I think, things like burnout become a significant issue. But one thing I would, just to finish this, what I'm saying here, I'd add is I remember speaking to a sports psychologist really early about this. And they say for athletes in particular, this is so important because they become so identified with being an athlete. I am a sports person. I am an athlete. That becomes their identity, which is part of the reason why when they retire, it can be so problematic. So what they say is, find different things you can do. So you add to your identity, and you haven't got just one identity, you've got multiple identities. Now, I think that's okay advice, but I would say, you can do all these things, be an athlete, play the piano, be a parent, all these things, right? When we all have so much in life without ever taking any of them as your identity. You can be a good dad or a good parent without thinking that's who I am, and I think by holding identity extremely lightly, that to me is part of how we retain some of that childlike enthusiasm, enoughness, all that kind of stuff we've discussed, because it's there underneath all these ideas and accompanying feelings that we have about ourselves, and that's essentially what we get in touch with in meditation, as you well know, Mark. So yeah, I think that covers your question, I hope.
No, absolutely brilliant. I think, we're complex, but we're simple as well. I think we can make it very, very complicated. And I certainly think in the world of trading, there is certainly a need at times to reflect. Because I think when people do try too hard, they and there's certain types of analysis, technical analysis, where you see people trying so hard to fit every line possible to suit any type of scenario to work out where it's going to go next. But all they've created is just this fog, and it becomes a fog that they make stupid decisions on, and they get frustrated, and of course frustration then leads to stress. Then they definitely can't see through the fog, and so keeping it simple is one of the mantras in the world of trading. Is keep the thing simple. Yeah. And you're more likely to find, the opportunity. There's no guarantee, but you're more likely to find it if you keep things simple.
Yeah. People want things complicated, though, don't they? They resist simplicity, but I think you're absolutely right. Yeah,
they feel that success comes from being, complicated. But I think if success comes from flow, if flow is doing something without mind, performing without mind.
I like that. Yeah, you're out of the way.
Then you're not getting in your own way. It's when we start to get in our way, we don't perform.
Totally.
Which then turns into no flow. But sometimes we think that's just good enough. But actually, if we got ourselves out of the way, I think we operate at a different level, and we observe at a different level as well. So it's not just how we do things; it's that peripheral vision. The messy type approach of, he was barely moving in some of the last games I saw him, but was he aware of what was going on? Absolutely, fully aware.
Yeah,
fully aware of what was going on, and this grace, this, and it comes back to presence, I guess. Flow, flow with no effort kind of falls into that where that word presence sits as well.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, you can't separate them.
Stephen.
God, the trouble is I've got too many thoughts now going through my head. It's such a fascinating and important topic. And getting out your own way is the way, I suppose is the perfect way of describing this. But, you said something really interesting about, self-improvement earlier on, and you had some, you kind of shook your head a little bit about the concept of self-improvement. And I found myself radically agreeing with you then, because for me, it's about finding yourself and getting back to yourself, and improving yourself, that yourself is already incredibly capable. And you talk about the baby, and the baby at that point is only themselves, and there is no other version of them. There is no ego.
Exactly.
And look how amazing that baby is.
Yeah.
And that baby is sponge now, is learning everything and anything. For the first 2-3 years of their life, they learn more than they probably do the rest of our lives. And unfortunately, one of the things we learn or we start developing is an ego, which is often what that alternative version of ourself, that ourself we often end up wanting to identify with, gets in the way. And I always go back at this point to the Inner Game of Tennis, that brilliant book. And, those two versions of yourself, and how Tim Galway talks about that core self, that natural self, how capable it is. And if you just don't worry about thinking about how you're going to hit the ball, but just let yourself hit it, you will hit the ball so much better. And that is, like we said, that is what gets in the way. And I'm really curious about how much societal pressure then, we know that creates the problems in a way, and we can't avoid it because we grow up in these societies with social beings. But it seems more complicated and complex than ever.
Yeah, I agree with you. And you say, I think we know this to be the case. I think most people probably don't know this to be the case. And I think that's probably part of it. I think there is a sense of, if it's not working, I'm going to think my way through it. I'm going to think harder. That's the way, as opposed to, like you say, in the inner game of tennis, and as you put very nice, Steve, getting out of our own way. And there's an analogy that's popped in my head, and I can't remember whose it was, but they gave sort of an image of someone sat atop an elephant, and the elephant represents our sort of conscious mind, and within that you can hold, I don't know, let's say 3 to 6 ideas at a time. But the elephant itself, the power in the elephant is huge, and that represents our sort of subconscious mind and our the self too, or one, I can't remember which one it is, but that Tim Galway talks about. And when we are able to not stress that or be too lost on the guy sat across in top of the elephant and let the elephant do its thing, then that's when the wonders come. But I agree with you. at school, it's all about just cramming as much knowledge in quite a rote way into our heads, and obviously now as well, I think with these smartphones that we're increasingly aware of the need to be conscious around how we use them, particularly for young people. It wasn't that long ago that if you wanted to watch the news or catch up on the news, you had to wait till whatever it was, the 9 o'clock news or the 10 o'clock news. And obviously now, that's been a bit of my Achilles heel in the past. You can just be completely lost in this, and you're filling yourself up continually with, information. And so I think being really conscious about what we consume in that way can be a really valuable approach. Yeah. And, and increasingly I try and do that. I've managed to wean myself off, at least for the time being, my habit of reaching for the phone in any kind of moment, actually, and using it just when I want to use it rather than, that impulsive moment. And so, I think I completely agree. I think that it's like a trash can being filled up all the time. I think it's never been more common than it is now. And, a few of my guests, if I think of, I spoke to Sam Harris, and he said, in fact, he wasn't the only one. I think Cal Newport said it as well. For the first time in human history, we never have to be bored. And we're all aware of that. I remember very recently going to the train station to get a train up into London, and I looked down the platform, and the majority of people have got their head in their phones. And when people queue to get a drink, or even, dare I say it, go to the lavatory, any moment of sort of downtime, they'll reach for their phone. And what that's doing is, not only is it keeping us in a state of kind of mental arousal, which comes back to what we spoke about earlier in terms of, switching the computer off, but also it's just filling people up with more and more stuff, when actually allowing space for emptiness and presence and that kind of thing is so valuable. And without that, I think we restrict our chances and ability of getting into the kind of states we've been talking about, where we feel and perform at our best.
Yeah, and it is interesting that, because and I think what you were talking about earlier on, where you said there's people before they go into sport, they were playing boggle, or trying to take their mind, I suppose, detaching a little bit, so that they can be present. They can then be present when they need to be.
100%.
And that's such a hard thing to do. And that's trying to stop ourselves, like Mark said that phrase before. It's trying to say, getting in our own way.
100. I think that's absolutely spot on. I think we spent so much of the time doing exactly that. This insight was brought into sharp focus for me many years ago when I was struggling with insomnia, and I'd go to bed and I'd have the thought, I'm not going to sleep, and tomorrow's going to be awful, and then I'd try and think my way out of this problem. And it was only when someone introduced me actually to the idea to acceptance and commitment therapy, and that key insight of the difference between the thinking mind and the aware mind, which was absolutely revelatory for me and has had so much momentum for me ever since then. And this was, well over 10, 15 years ago. And it's sort of snowballed ever since. But that was just such an insight, because it just had never even occurred to me that there was any other option than thinking to get rid of thinking. That, that's what did Einstein say? You can't fix a problem at the level that it's been created. And if you're creating problems at the level of thought and then trying to use thought to get out of it, well, that'll never work.
We're going to return to the podcast in a second. Just a quick reminder that the Alpha Mind podcast is very kindly sponsored by the Society of Technical Analysts, the STA, the world's leading body for the advancement of technical analysis, research and education. Amongst many of their fine services is their diploma program and their home study course, which is based on the diploma program and has been put together by some of the world's leading technical analysts. This is a chance to really go in depth into technical analysis, study different methods, different approaches, and also to look at practical application of it. Alpha Mind listeners can obtain a small discount on the price of the home study course by going to the Alpha Mind website, alpha-mind.net, or Googling Alpha Mind and scrolling down to the section about the home study course. Now back to the podcast.
So I guess I want to add to that if I can, because something just comes to mind in terms of your brain cannot think and sense at the same time. If it's thinking, it's not sensing. And actually, if it's sensing and thus present, it's not thinking. So, and we have that, we do have this choice.
Yeah.
But we do have the need to, and I think the highest performers are kind of monitoring themselves in real time and will notice the drift into thought.
Yes.
And then kind of get themselves present to avoid it, to be able to then be in flow. As you say, presence equals flow.
Can I give you a quick example? A brilliant example has just come to mind. So I do TV at Wimbledon each year, and I do, the in-depth interviews with the players. And I interviewed Ons Jabeur and Novak Djokovic for the women's final and the men's final. Ons Jabeur was favourite in the women's and Novak in the men's. And I remember Ons talking about, lovely woman, and talking about positive thinking. And when you're in a pressure moment, like to really think positive and put a positive spin on it. And there was all this research around it. Anyway, she went out into the final and really froze. And you could see she was really stuck in her head. And it was quite difficult to watch. And then if you compare that with Novak, I listened to an interview with him fairly recently. And the interviewer said something like, oh, your greatest gift is you're mentally strong. And he said, look, let me correct you. It's not a talent. It's not a gift. It's something I've worked at. And he talks about, this idea of that we should be positive all the time, or positive thinking is really overrated. And he said, I will often have a storm going on inside me, but what I've been able to learn is that ability to be pulled by that and then come back to yourself through, whether it be something like conscious breathing, which is obviously that's a sensation you're getting in touch with, or obviously, what you can hear, what you can feel, what you can smell, what you can see, all those kind of things. Absolutely, to root yourself in the present moment that way. And I really like that. I really like this idea of, this challenging this idea that negative thinking is bad, or that we shouldn't feel anxious, or, people talk about imposter syndrome. Like, to me, that's just anxiety when you're out of your comfort zone, totally normal. It's only the resistance to it in the battle with it that's the problem. And and I think having someone like Novak talk about the storm inside, but being able to recenter is very healthy and flies in the face actually of a lot of positive psychology.
So I love that, because for us, Novak Djokovic is kind of our hero. We run lots of workshops. We give lots of talks in companies, and he's become one of those people that we bring up all the time, because he's such. I mean, he plays both games. We call it the outer game and the inner game, and in my book I talk about the outer game and the inner game, and you have to win both games. You can't win both, and when you watch the best tennis players as well, about this more than me. Technically, there's not a lot of difference between them. And on any one day, any one of them can beat any other one. And then it comes down to the inner game. And for us, watching Novak Djokovic sometimes, even when his outer game is not performing as well as maybe his opponent's outer game, he's still outperforming the opponent on the inner game. And there was that brilliant final a couple of years ago with Berrettini at Wimbledon. And I thought Berrettini was just brilliant on that day, and was playing better than Djokovic, but Djokovic just outfought him on the inner game. And we've seen that so often in finals and big matches over the years.
And I think you're absolutely right. And it's definitely something he's cultivated, because early on that wasn't the case. He was actually known for for being very injury prone, for pulling out. He lost a lot of big matches to Federer and Nadal, and then obviously sort of turned that round and has become this absolute, mental monster, I think, as someone like Jurgen Klopp might say. But and I think that's what I like about it. I think you're absolutely right, but it's that cultivation of it mindfully, and anyone can do that. There's literally anyone can do that.
But it's like he's aware of it all the time. He can just put it out when he needs to,
which
is what is incredible. And another one of my heroes over the years has been Andy Murray. But again, you saw his game change when he started working with Lendl, and I felt that the change was in the mind rather than anything else.
I talk about that in my book, Steve. You must have read that chapter. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he did. I think you're absolutely right. You saw less histrionics. There were a few technical changes in terms of a bit of forehand power, but yeah, I think Lendl for him was a very grounding, calming influence. And he would look up into the box. And Andy was well known for sort of ranting his team, or whatever. And he'd look up, and Lendl sat there looking like the Terminator, or Arnold Schwarzenegger. Just no emotion whatsoever. And so there was no resistance to Andy stuff. There was nothing for Andy to bounce off in that way. And so Andy sort of calmed down, giving him more energy to put into the action on court. And yeah, I think their results together speak for themselves.
Yeah, I must admit I haven't read the book yet, as you can tell. It's very much on my Audible waiting.
Oh, bless you, Steve. I appreciate that.
And I cannot wait to. Did you do the Audible?
Yes, I did. Yeah, I did. Yeah, I did. And actually, I learned a valuable lesson. I was given 3 days to do it, and I tried to do it in 2, and I succeeded in doing it 2. And all it did was kipper me on the 3rd day. So I learned a valuable lesson about only doing enough today that you can recover from tomorrow. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, that is, yeah. The narrator for my Audible actually got a bad throat.
Oh, did he?
Through it. They delayed the book for about 3-4 weeks.
Oh, wow. Right.
Audible version.
Yeah.
But, it's interesting. A lot of people said to me, "Why didn't you do the Audible yourself?" I don't think they even asked me. I think they wanted an actor to.
Right.
But it's interesting. It must be more powerful when you do it yourself, because you have the emphasis in your voice at the right moments.
I'm not sure. Yeah, maybe so. I mean, it's a lot of reading, So it felt quite different to when I do some broadcasting, when I'm, some of which is scripted, on the radio in particular. It was so dense. There was so much to get through. My focus was kind of on that. I'm sure I would have been able to better capture that than someone else, invariably. But yeah, but my abiding memory was just how much there was to read, because you make mess ups and you got to go back and do that line again, and it's 60,000 or 80,000 words or whatever at the end of the day. So yeah, it was a slog. It was fun, but don't do it in 2 days. That would be my advice.
Sounds like homework to me.
yeah. I mean, absolutely.
I keep on getting told, when are you going to write your book? When are you going to write your book? Okay, at some point I'll write a book. But, I want to ask you a quick question about mindfulness, because I know that you've got very similar interests to myself in terms of performance. And if you ask 100 people, you get 100 versions of what mindfulness means to them. But, in the world that you connected to for high performance was, certainly, tuning into the present and tuning into your senses is a version of it. But was anyone doing anything that you think that's an interesting version of self-management?
Well, so I quite like John Kabat-Zinn's definition, which is paying attention in the moment on purpose, something like that.
Yeah.
But actually, for me, there isn't a kind of an extra depth to it, because I remember listening. I was sat on a Vauxhall train station once on a bench, and two people next to me were talking about meditation and mindfulness, and they were talking about, it's about thinking about the present moment. And I had to bite my lip and be like, it's not about thinking about the present moment. It's about being in the present moment. And so I think for me, mindfulness 2.0, in a way, is being aware of being aware. Mm-hmm. And so I love, as you say, Mark, like when I do the Today program, so I'm doing in a couple of days, I'm up at the crack of dawn. So very adrenaline fueled, very intense for a few hours, but I'm done by 9 o'clock. And then I walk from Broadcasting House across the bridge to Waterloo, and I pass on the right Big Ben, House of Parliament, and the London Eye. And the last time I went, I was crossing over and the chimes were going. Big Ben was chiming. I think I said bonging last time. It's definitely not bonging, chiming. And obviously just paying attention, being tuned into that sound itself, that is mindfulness right there. Not thinking about the sound, but just really paying attention to the sound. But then I quite like adding an extra dimension to it, and to being aware of what it is that's aware of the sound. And because that's a really interesting question, because it's not what, it's not our identity. It's not who we think we are, because again, we're aware of our thoughts. There's it's presence, basically, Mark. It's this presence that is there. It's our fundamental identity, you could say. I think being aware of that, not as an object, but just sensing it, that for me is mindfulness 2.0. But yeah, getting out is certainly not thinking your way into presence, as those people on the bench said. That's for sure.
Yeah. And I imagine the likes of Djokovic, when he loses a point and he walks from baseline to bench, loses the game to sit down, he's probably paying attention to the sensation of walking across centre court and the feeling of that.
Yeah, I know he's a big mindful. He's big into. He's very much into mindful breathing. I know that he said that a lot, and that that's something that's my go-to. I've tinkered with different types of meditation, but fundamentally, I'll always come back to just following my breath down in my belly, as far away from my head as possible, and just that rise and fall, just as that rise and fall in my belly, and and I know that when I do that for a long period of time, and I don't mean in one single sitting, but sequentially over days, weeks, months, even, then you are cultivating your mindfulness muscle, no doubt about it, and that ability to spot reactions arising in your nervous system and not being just grabbed by them and led on a merry dance. That ability to observe and respond rather than just react, and be spun around like a loose cannon.
No, it's very profound. I mean, we've run workshops for big corporates in terms of, optimizing traders and the trader ecosystem. We sort of go into some of our own stories, and on several of them, we've ended it with actually me showing them what I did to get through trauma. And a lot of the people there, it's the first time they've ever had 2 minutes of just the focus on the breath and the way we did it, and the impact it has on people to just think, God, I've not felt that state before. But actually, you can start to encourage them that in their little moments of the day when they can do that, they become a better version of themselves to be able to perform at peak when needed. And yes, I think it's a broad church, and one that I'm sure people listening to our podcasts and yours and many others will pick up hints, because we're all a bit different. But I want to also throw in something. Have you ever read or heard the poem by, I think it's Nadine Starr, called If? Nadine Starr, 85-year-old reflecting back on her life, saying, if I live my life again, I'd try to make more mistakes next time. I'd try to be sillier than I've been on this trip. I try to have moment after moment, and I try to have nothing else but moments.
Yes, yeah.
And that poem I picked up when I was going through difficulties as a trader, and it changed the way I thought about how I engage with life in those moments when you can engage with it, but actually immersing yourself in that vocation and the stuff you do that's not just your job, but the other stuff makes you far more powerful in doing the job that you need to do when you need to perform. And some of that is like this thing about, going on more merry-go-rounds and eating more ice cream and picking more daisies, all those silly things you do as a kid, but actually, it's kind of quite refreshing to remind yourself about that. And having a young kid, you can almost relive that journey at times. I'm sure you do.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, definitely. But even like at the train station, I mentioned about the people being on their phones, and I was really struck by that. And I remember that very day looking up into the sky. I remember feeling the wind on my face. I remember there was, birds flying around, and looking up into the sky and briefly pondering the fact that, as far as we know, you're looking up into the best part of infinity, right? And yet we lose the wonder of these miracles, that because we become just immune to them, and instead it's this small little device in our hand. But if it was our last day on Earth, we'd look around and go, God, what have I missed? And I think as to what you said in terms of that poem and what you went through, is the more we can cultivate this, in the easier moments, then the more accessible it is in the harder moments. And I definitely for me, there are those little moments in the day, but also I do like sitting down and doing, at least 20, ideally up to around 45. And it's just lovely. You get to a point, don't you, where it's like, there's this stillness and this just joy of being. And I think that it's so nice to reconnect with that there is in just settling things down. And there is this really lovely joy of being that is present really at any moment. But in this pursuit of looking at our phones all the time and being distracted and thinking about the future and the past, we miss that. And that's a real shame.
Yeah, there's some big messages there about, for those that are performing, that actually you can sit at your screen all day long and stare at it, but there's this mental exhaustion that comes from that. I mean, I had a client once that traded from 8 a.m., had a small break at 5 p.m., finished trading at 11 p.m. And until I reminded him that he was early 20s, where's your social life, where's your girlfriend? And, everyone's neglecting you because they just think you're nuts because you're working all the time. So you're missing out on all sorts of stuff. And he totally rearranged his day and ended up getting a girlfriend and shrinking the trading day because he suddenly realized the fact that the doing bit of life was far more important than the trying to make money and just being there 24/7. And I think there are a lot of people in the trading space, particularly the retail trading space, that just feel that the presence of being in front of a screen to try to make money is what it's all about. But they're not going to write that on your gravestone. Yeah, he was a good trader.
No. Yeah, absolutely. I went to see someone actually, and I was talking about this very subject of how we all look to the future. And obviously, one of those things is like retirement and legacy. And this guy said, someone had been at this company for 50 years and they left, and there was a big hoo-ha. And then, within a week, it like they'd never been there. And so, living for legacy and retirement and all that stuff. We miss what's right in front of us the whole time.
Listen, I'm very conscious of the time, and we've got to bring this to an end, which is, I feel personally it's a shame because it's such a great conversation.
That's been lovely.
I suppose in a sense, Mark, you can wrap it up in a minute. But I do have a question, which is, what did you learn about yourself when you were doing this?
But writing the book?
Yeah.
Goodness me, what did I learn about myself? I learned about myself that I, like anyone, can fall victim to the mind and its spinning stories and creating our experience moment to moment, whether that be, oh no, I can't do that because I've got to do this work, or thinking, oh, when the book comes out, this will change, or this will upset certain people. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting process writing a book, because it can be such a slog. I'll tell you, actually, another thing that came to mind actually was, I think when I wrote my first draft of the book, I tried to, a lot of thinking went into it. And what I mean by that is I was thinking, okay, what's the book I should write? And then I had a bit of a break, and the publishers were a little slow in getting back to me, which in hindsight was no bad thing. And when I came back to it, the second draft was completely different. And it wasn't what I should write. It was opening up to what I wanted to write and kind of getting out of my own way. And so the first draft, that was torturous at times, and I felt like I wanted to smash my head against the wall. The second draft, it flowed so much easier, because it was like I wasn't thinking, okay, who's this pitched out or any of that. It was like, no, let's just open up and kind of see what comes. And it was a much more joyful experience and a much more flowing experience. And I think definitely the end product was way better as a result. So that comes back to what we said before about, like getting out of your own way, not overthinking things, and taking those breaks, like I said, at lunch to power down and come back and be able to produce so much better stuff by not fixating it as that guy on top of the elephant, but letting the elephant itself do the work.
Again, can you just remind for our audience before you finish the name of the book, where they can buy it, and just a little bit where they can find a little bit more about you, because you've got your podcast, you've got your news.
Yeah, sure. So the book's called Champion Thinking: How to Find Success Without Losing Yourself. And as I've alluded to, it's really trying to flip what you might expect with the title, like Champion Thinking, on its head. Published by Bloomsbury, available, Amazon, WH Smith, all the usual places, as well on my website, which is simonmundie.com. Podcast is called The Life Lessons Podcast currently. Whether or not I decide to change the name again, we'll have to wait and see. And yeah, that's pretty much it. And then, all the usual social media platforms at Simon Mundie. And then we fired up a YouTube in the last year. And that's been interesting, seeing what really resonates with people. And rather than necessarily the really big sporting anecdotes and stories, actually, it's the kind of stuff we've been talking about today that I think really resonates, which I think is really interesting. And I think shines a light on where a lot of people are at right now compared to 5, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. And it's these kind of conversations that I think are really valuable and really interesting, and seem to resonate, which I think is quite exciting.
Well, normal is great. I mean, I just want to go back to being normal is okay, right? And actually appreciate and enjoy just where you are fully in terms of, your performance and your role, but have a vocational thing going on, because you kind of need it to power the other stuff. Which I guess goes back to some degree of mental balance, and a balance in a more holistic sort of way. And it certainly helped me, having something else to get involved with if I felt I was having difficulties in the performance world. You kind of need this parachute, because even as you said from Johnny Wilkinson, even being enormously successful, you don't have a parachute. It's a long way to go, and it's a pretty hard landing. And it may have taken quite a while to recover from that. And I think, to have a journey that's sustainable, with a plan for something else, by having a broad range of interests, I think has been a big message of this particular podcast. And, realizing that we do have, 50, 60,000 thoughts a day, and it's up to us whether we jump onto the bandwagon and get with them, or whether we notice we've drifted that way and get ourselves, through a few breaths or a walk or whatever, into being present when presence actually matters when we perform. Yeah. So, but be a kid every now and then. I think that's super helpful. But Simon, brilliant to have you on. I'm sure we'll have you on again. But we're best of luck with all the various initiatives, and of course with Wimbledon coming up, we'll be tuning in.
Absolutely, yes, please do. I'll give you a shout out, guys. Well, actually, no, they won't let me. That's a fib. But if I would, I could. But listen, it's been a pleasure. Always enjoyed chatting to you both. So thanks so much for having me back on. I really enjoyed it.
thank you for listening to the Alpha Mind podcast today. We also want to extend a thank you to our podcast sponsor, the Society of Technical Analysts. Do check out their brilliant home study course, and you can see more about that at our website, alpha-mind.net. And of course, if you're keen to know more about how Alpha Mind can help you, please do also look up further details of our services on our website, or reach out to us at info@alpha-mind.net. That just leaves us to say thank you, and we wish you the best of luck in the weeks ahead.